Okay, hello again, everybody. Welcome to the next session. I was just reflecting on the fact that Emily's first session talked about the complexity of the space and how important it is for people to work together to solve problems, to collaborate and to partner. And I'm going to introduce you now to Hylke Koers, who's Program Director of SeamlessAccess. And SeamlessAccess as an organization exists to foster better relationships, to foster conversations, to bring people together to try and solve some of the problems in this space. And I'll now pass over to Hylke, who would introduce one of the problems and talk through the current thinking on it. So over to you, Hylke. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. That's a perfect introduction. So my name is Hylke Koers. I serve as CIO of FedCM Solutions and also as Program Director for SeamlessAccess. And it's my pleasure to be here today and talk with you about changes in browser technology and how we expect those changes will impact researchers' access to scholarly resources. Before I dive into that, I also wanted to say a few words about SeamlessAccess, because not everybody in the audience may be familiar with that. And like John said, SeamlessAccess fundamentally is really all about collaboration. It's very much a community-driven effort with the aim of making access experience more seamless, more intuitive, more powerful. So the main objectives are to improve the access user experience for researchers, both on campus and off campus, and really making it easier to benefit from all the value of federated authentication. And of course, in doing that, also help support the continued development of infrastructure and standards in identity federations. SeamlessAccess is run by a coalition that consists of 4 parties. That's NISO, Internet2, Géant, and STM. But really a lot of the work is done with that community in collaborative structures, like John also alluded to, working groups and committees, etc., also including participation from OpenAthens as the host of today's seminar. So SeamlessAccess consists of 3 main value elements that I'd like to briefly go through. First of all, SeamlessAccess is a standard recognizable access button, which can be integrated on third-party websites. So websites that offer scholarly resources, could be publishers, but could also be other parties that offer resources for researchers. The button has a certain smartness, so if SeamlessAccess knows about your chosen identity provider because you have selected that IDP before, then that can be presented in the button. And really the crux of this button is to make this standard recognizable across different sites such that users will start to recognize and trust it. The second main element, or the main value element of SeamlessAccess, is the standardized IDP discovery, also known as the Where Are You From service. Again, a standardized way for researchers to find their institute from a potentially very large list. We do a lot of user research, so we like to think that this offers a best-in-class user experience. The third main component of SeamlessAccess is this persistence layer that remembers the user's choice of institute across different participating sites. So if you as a user select your institute, your IDP from a list from on one website that integrates with SeamlessAccess, and then if you move to another website that integrates with SeamlessAccess, that choice of institute will have persisted, and you can benefit from that to streamline your access experience. This all happens locally in the browser, fully under control of the user, and we also take user privacy really at the heart of everything we do. I could spend 10 minutes talking about SeamlessAccess, but of course, I also really want to talk about these browser changes. So just one more slide for now. And of course, there's much more information you can find on our website or happy to pick up with you offline if you'd like. This slide, which I still wanted to share, really speaks about the evidence that we have that demonstrates that SeamlessAccess is indeed fulfilling its promise of making it easier for users to benefit from federated authentication. 2 different parties that have integrated with SeamlessAccess over the course of last year have shared this in webinars and blog posts, really measuring the additional utilization, the additional usage of federated authentication after implementing SeamlessAccess. And in the case of IOP publishing, that was as much as an 82% increase, which has also remained pretty stable after that implementation. So that gives us some confidence that we're doing something right here. Let me change gears and really move to sort of the main course of today, if you like, which is this topic of browser changes. So first, to set the scene a little bit, I wanted to explain sort of the dynamics behind this. And it really starts with these big technology organizations, Google, Apple, Mozilla, that are currently working on some of the fundamentals, how browser engines work, and really making some pretty fundamental changes that will also affect access for researchers in particular. It's important to understand the driver for these changes. The imperative is really around user privacy considerations, legislation such as GDPR, etc. And really the aim is to prevent and make it technically impossible or much more difficult for this type of unsanctioned tracking of users across the web that we see today. And I would think many of us also here in the audience today would agree that fundamentally that's a good thing. However, these changes will also, or are bound to also have quite an impact on access technology. And that's because some of the primitives that are used currently for this type of unsanctioned user tracking are the same core functionalities, the same primitives that are used for access journeys, for example, third-party cookie access. Another element of this is IP addresses. Also, IP addresses can be used to trace users, to build profiles, etc. So we're starting to see and be engaged with these browser vendors in discussions on how they are increasingly limiting those functionalities, again, with the view of making it technically impossible or more difficult to track users on the web. But also as an unintended side effect, we see the risk that this may break some of the access technologies that we have in place today. So when is this happening? The challenge here, of course, the timelines and the decisions here are set at the headquarters of these big tech companies. We are very much engaged with them, but of course, ultimately, we don't know all the details and all the timelines. But it is important to realize that this is not something for the very far future. Some of this is happening already today. Apple was leading the charge some time ago. They already announced that in the iCloud private relay, by default, IP addresses will be hidden. And more recently, also Google One announced new security features, including standard VPN tools. So we're starting to see the first instances of this broader dynamics of these browser vendors making it increasingly difficult to track users, or the flip side of that, enabling privacy features by default for some of their users. So what's SeamlessAccess doing in this space, and how are we engaging with these browser vendors to make sure that this doesn't break access flows on the academic, on the scholarly web? So first of all, that actively having conversations with them. There was a workshop earlier this month at the start of March, including SeamlessAccess and other parties in the research and education landscape, to really have an exchange between that community and these browser vendors on these changes. Again, it's important to realize that also these browser vendors have no intention of breaking scholarly access in the scholarly web, but there is a risk that this may become an unintended side effect. So we want to make sure that we engage with them to bring across existing use cases and existing technology and make sure they have an understanding of that, which is quite different from the consumer web in many cases. Another thing that we're doing, again, working closely with browser vendors, is to test proposed new technologies, for example, federated credential management, which we see as really the leading contender for a new technology that may replace some of these functions that will likely be deprecated in the future, like third-party cookies. And of course, raising awareness and inform our community about these developments, for example, in today's presentations. I have here a whole list of resources. I won't read them aloud. I'm sure the slides will be shared, and all of this is available from the SeamlessAccess website as well. And I did want to do a brief shout out to a webinar that we're organizing on April 6th, where we will talk about this for a full hour with ample time for Q&A. So feel free to join us there. Bit of detail around FedCM, Federated Credentials Management. I don't have the time to go into a lot of the technical details, plus a lot of this is still in flux, but just a few observations that I wanted to share with you. First of all, as a new emerging standard, this is really spearheaded by Google, who have been working on this for quite some time. But what has changed over the last couple of months is that we now also see support emerging from other parties, notably Apple and Mozilla. So adding that all up, this really seems to be the leading contender for an alternative technology. We expect that FedCM will remain under active development until at least November this year. And one of the big changes that we anticipate is going to happen is that some of the access functions that are currently handled by the browser or by service, but on the service provider side, will move into the browser itself. So some of the access functionality will be handled by the browser proper and not by the website. That means that will bring about some big changes for all parties working with federated access. So this is not only just about SeamlessAccess or about OpenAthens, but basically everything that works with SAML or related technologies. Today, there are two proposals that are currently being discussed and being elaborated. I've put the links in here again. It would be too much detail, and this is still in the state of flux to really go into a lot of the technicalities here. But if you're interested, this is all openly available. The last slide for today before we open it up for Q&A. What can I do? And of course, it's always challenging if things may change quite significantly, but there is still a lot of unclarity about this. I would advise you to make sure that you stay well informed and your organization stay well informed. From SeamlessAccess and STM and other sides, we are doing our best to relay the information and share with you what we can, especially in those conversations with browser vendors. Discuss with your partners, with your customers, be prepared for user questions if at some point their access journey breaks, that you are aware of why that might be and that you can help troubleshoot them. And finally, if you'd like to be a bit closer to the fire, there is a W3C community group that is actively working on this, the Federated Identity Community Group. The link is over there. I think that's the group of people that are most closely involved in the conversations with browser vendors. So you can also join that group if you really want to contribute to that conversation. Let me stop there, and I'll be happy to take a couple of questions, time permitting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hylke. We had one question in the chat was about the April 6th webinar, and I can see that Michael's already responded to that. And we would urge people to sign up and join and participate. I suppose one question that has come through is what do you think the early signs will be that things are broken? If it's so, in England we have the phrase the first swallows of summer. I just wonder what would be those early signs that, and who would be seeing them?
Yeah, I would anticipate that the early signs or the early indicators are users suddenly not able to access scholarly resources, for example, online publications on the basis of IP-based access. Moving back a couple of slides. People who are on a Google One plan or using iCloud Private Relay all of a sudden find themselves not able to access a scholarly article behind for which their IP needs to be recognized, while maybe their neighbor who is sitting next to them in the lab is still able to access that same article just because they have a different browser or a different setting or a different subscription plan. I think that will probably one of the early indicators.
Thank you for that. We've had a question, it's coming in from Catherine, who works with the NHS in the UK, and it's about multi-account affiliation or switching from one account to another during the user flow. It's one of the issues we currently experience is switching from one institution to another in the same session. Is there any likelihood that these big changes will have a positive impact on that?
That is a great question, and I like the thinking behind that every risk brings its opportunities. So I'd like to say yes. I think while collectively we are reviewing some of these infrastructure and key underlying tooling, that should be the moment that you try to fix some of these persistent issues also. I do not know if this use case is already included in some of the thinking behind these two proposals that I offered the links to. But if not, I do think that is a good use case to take on board, and I'll be happy to relay that to the people that are working on that.
Well, no, very, very quickly, there's a question about Easy Proxy. Do you think the Easy service like Easy Proxy will run into challenges?
Challenges most definitely, because
Yeah.
that is largely based on IP recognition, if I understand correctly. I'm
Yeah.
not super familiar with the technology, but my understanding is it works on top of IP recognition.
I think.
So yes, these types of features would pose difficulties for them. Yes.
And then I'm gonna draw it to us that there are questions coming in, and what we'll do, we'll take those questions and find a forum to answer those appropriately. But we'll just answer Virginia's. Is there a centralized place where troubleshooting tips are being gathered? And yes, SeamlessAccess has a FAQ question on this, and I think SeamlessAccess.org is a great place to start your discovery and exploration around this issue. That's a fair comment. Do you think, Hylke?
I could not agree more, John.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So what I would add, massive thanks to Hylke for opening the doors to a really complex solution in sort of 10 to 15 minutes or so. Thank you for the questions. OpenAthens is going to look for these problems, and we see ourselves as another channel to the community in terms of listening and answering some of these questions as they come through. So thank you to everyone for joining the session. Thank you, Hylke. We've now got 20 minutes for a stretch of our legs. I've already eaten my Tunnock's tea cake. So I hope everybody else takes the opportunity to get a snack and a refreshment. So thank you very much.